I went to Mecca in 1974 and became Al-Hajj Amin Shahid, but then I realized that that tradition was not an African cultural tradition, nor was it an African spiritual tradition. So I resigned as the imam over the mosque after 11 years.
Now I know you are an advocate of the African traditional religion. Now, when you look at these different religions, some people claim that there are some similarities. If we just look at those, we can easily find each other. What's your response to that?
No. At the core of the African identity is the African cultural and spiritual systems. We had our own way. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are mere fragments from the periphery of the African traditional indigenous spiritual system. They don't have the capacity to build spirituality. They're intellectual, theological treaties based on fragments that they stole from us through warfare and conquest.
Do you think African countries should embrace their tradition and go back to the idea of kingdom?
Let's get real. The colonial systems don't work. Just like the colonial borders don't work. You divide a kingdom in half and make this one country, and this is another country, and it's the same ethnic group. And now you got fighting each other over who's got which colonial language, who's got which colonial parliamentary concept or democratic concept. None of it is democracy.
What's your message to Africans that are watching this show right now?
Study history. Study your history.
There's so much African wisdom in African folklores, stories, songs, and other cultural tools. We need this priceless wisdom as we work towards building a continent for our children and children's children. The African Passport Show facilitates the transmission of such invaluable knowledge from the enlightened gurus to the young who are thirsty and hungry. I'm your host, Godfrey Mr. G. Madanire, and today we are schooled by Professor James Small. Welcome to the show, Prof.
Thank you, Brother Godfrey. I'm happy to be with you on the show.
And class is in session. Now, I will start off by appreciating your background. I know you started off your journey as a bodyguard for Malcolm X's sister. How did that influence your growth?
Well, that's not my start, but that's a good place to start. Let me do my start.
Absolutely. We'll appreciate that.
Yeah, because I grew up in a very African village in America. You know, we don't think of African villages in America, but when Africans build their villages, they're African village. And the only thing they have to build with is what they brought from Africa. And so I was very surprised when I finally got to West Africa and it looked just like my home. And people did the same thing we did. They carried things on their head. They tied their hair, the women the same way. They had the same needle to make the fishing net. They even fished the way we fished. And I go like, oh, I grew up in Africa. I thought I was coming to find Africa. And this was a little village in South Carolina. The people were a mixed group of people from Congo, Cameroon, South Africa. We checked the genes, of course, a lot of West Africa. And a lot of those traditions are retained even to today in that area of South Carolina. They call us the Gullah Geechee people. And we have virtually our own culture for about 200 or 300 miles along the coast. We live. And so I got involved in the movement at age 14 in the South. Picketing the Walmarts, running white stores out of the Black community, literally fighting with white young men on the streets because they wanted us to get off the sidewalk. And we said, no, you will get off the sidewalk or it's going to be war. And it got so tough that the government would they closed the white school early to give them 15 minutes head start. Because when we got on the sidewalk, we weren't moving. And so we got out of school late to let the white kids get home first. You know? So
Oh.
that all started when I'm 14. But I met Malcolm X when I'm 16 years old, and my mother, 1963, and my mother brought me to New York to meet him. And the one thing he advised me on was that education and skills was what was going to free our people, and that
Oh.
stuck with me. So I went in the military at 60 in 1964. And then from there, Malcolm is killed while I'm in the military. So when I come home, I go directly to his organization. I met his sister. They liked my behavior and spirit. So within 2 months, the council chose me to be her personal bodyguard. And,
Ah.
and that I did for 18 years. But within 6 months, I got elected as the imam over the Muslim mosques in corporate that Malcolm had founded. I went to Mecca in 1974 and became Al-Hajj Amin Shahid. But then I realized that that tradition was not an African cultural tradition, nor was it an African spiritual tradition. So I resigned as the imam over the mosque after 11 years. During that period of time, I got to work with the Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, H. Rap Brown, the organization called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, with Baba Shakur, Lumumba Shakur, Zaid Shakur in the Black Panther Party, and of course as an officer in the OAAU, as well as the imam over the mosque. Somewhere in there, 50 years ago, I met this very beautiful woman. She was a freshman in college. I was a sophomore, and we've been married 50 years, 8 children, 23 grandchildren. So she's the lady you got to thank this morning, because she's a medical doctor now, and she put off going to work so I can do Godfrey's show and talk. But
No, I really appreciate it, Prof.
Yeah, so that's kind of my background. That's where I come from. I've been in the struggle all of my life. I've been in frontline struggle, armed struggle. During that period, we supported, the fight in Zimbabwe. We supported Frelimo. We supported PAIGC in Guinea-Bissau. We supported MPLA. We supported SWAPO in many ways to put money to buy arms. We hid their members when they were running from the FBI here in America. We made sure that the SWAPO children got a free education at the university where I worked. So our life has been like in the struggle, all of our life. Matter of fact, it's the only life an African should have. If you're not struggling for freedom, you're not an African.
Oh, yes. And that's a very interesting story that you just shared with us. If there's anyone who had a doubt why we invited you on this show, I'm sure you've justified it already. Now you mentioned, that you were once an imam of the Islamic religion, which is very interesting, because now I know you are an advocate of the African traditional religion. Now, when you look at these different religions, some people claim that there are some similarities. If we just look at those, we can easily find each other. What's your response to that?
No. Dr. Asa Hilliard, one of my teachers, who's an ancestor, he said, freedom is being shackled to your identity. Shackled to your identity. At the core of the African identity is the African cultural and spiritual systems. We had our own way. Now, studying history, because I did teach theology as well at the university, comparative religion, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are mere fragments. Listen to me well. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are mere fragments from the periphery of the African traditional indigenous spiritual system.
Mm.
Okay. They don't have the capacity to build spirituality.
Mm.
Their intellectual, theological treaties based on fragments that they stole from us through warfare and conquests. And we need to be real about that. Our ancestors have been here for probably millions of years, but we can record them back at least 300,000 years in South Africa. And we didn't wait for something that popped up a few thousand years ago to instruct us about God. Okay. Our indigenous system is at the core of African culture wherever you are on the continent. And until we make that shift, we will never be free. Yes, we can use these other tools, just like we use their money, we use their technology, but they're limited tools when it comes to forming the consciousness that will free the African mind so that that mind can reconstruct its world in its own interests. And only an indigenous African orientation will allow us to do that.
It's getting heated here. Let me look for something that will cool it down a bit. Maybe, we have the Nile River, which is the longest in the world. It runs through a number of African countries for almost 6,700 kilometers. You believe this is much more than a river. There are lessons that we can learn from that.
Oh, absolutely. We just finished a documentary called Happy, Hapi. And the Africans call the river Happy. The Europeans call it the Nile, but our ancestors call it Happy. And that river, which flows all the way from Southern Africa, the white men like to say, oh, it started just in Ethiopia with the Blue Nile or the White Nile out of Uganda. No, it started with Lake Nyanza. It started with the tributaries draining off of the multiple rivers in South Africa and Congo. All of these rivers is flowing north because Africa is high and it slopes towards the Mediterranean. And so we said the Nile River symbolically tells us that when all of the tributaries, when all of the different aspects of Africa comes together, it produces a body, a river that will allow us to build civilization. So the river symbolized the unity of all of the African continent. And it is that unity that not only brought the water to build Kemet, Egypt, but it brought the people. The people came from South Africa, East Africa, West Africa, and they went north into the Nile Valley and built that civilization based on the history, the culture, and the tools they brought with them. Egypt wasn't built by people from the north. Egypt was built by people from the central, the south, the west, and the East Africa who traveled to the north, because the river proves that when different elements come together, you can create a fertile economic possibility. You can create a fertile cultural possibility. You can create in a unity in a Pan-African collective, a political possibility, a cultural possibility. That only comes when you have the ability to unite yourself. And that's why our indigenous culture, we must return to them. A man who is Shona, a man who's Zulu, a man who's Congo, a man who's Akan, a man who is Yoruba, they may have different symbols to express the culture, but the fundamental principles is the same in every one of those spiritual institutions, you see. And so that's what the Nile symbolizes for us. Yes, we have different tributaries, but we're one river.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Very interesting. Let me talk about our systems of governance in Africa. In Swaziland, now known as the Kingdom of Eswatini, it is an absolute monarchy. Outside Africa, we also have your Saudi Arabia and a few others that are absolute monarchies. Otherwise, the rest of the countries are constitutional democracies. Do you think African countries should embrace their tradition and go back to the idea of kingdoms?
Well, ask the most fundamental question. Are these systems we're using working? Do they provide the food, clothing, shelter, safety, and security our people require? Do they provide the healthcare system our people require? Do they provide the education system our people require? And the answer is a resounding no. It doesn't for some people, but we've created a colonial blackface elite, okay, that it resembles the colonial enemy, except for color, in almost every aspect, in almost every country. So those systems will never work for us. We are the wealthiest countries on the planet Earth. Most of the resources of the world is in our ground. And yet our young people could go to university and can't find jobs. And they have to sell and hawk on the roads in every country we got, selling breakdown Chinese goods on commission. No. Let's get real. The colonial systems don't work. Just like the colonial borders don't work. You divide a kingdom in half and make this one country, and this is another country, and it's the same ethnic group. And now you get fighting each other over who's got which colonial language, who's got which colonial parliamentary concept or democratic concept. None of it is democracy. You don't see, there's no democracy in America. You see what's going on here. There's no democracy in England. It is a pretense to democracy. Our system, when practiced appropriately, our kingdom system with our kings and our chiefs and our queens work for us when we practice them. They didn't fall apart because they were bad systems. They fell apart because our nations were invaded by marauders and murderers from Europe and America. After the Berlin Conference in 1835, every European army invaded Africa. That should have been called the First World War. They don't even call it a war. We fought gallantly with the tools we had, but we were no match for their new gun technology. That's what defeated us, the gun technology and their tenacity to murder and steal what someone else had. And the dismantling and the marginalizing of our indigenous system. And the one thing the British made very clear, I forgot which one of their lords or whatever they call them, that to feed Africa, you have to take away their culture. And so that's where the church and the mosque came in. To create an alternative culture and to murder our indigenous culture. Our indigenous culture, which is built around family, okay? Built around the mother, father, children, and then the relationship in the extended family that produce the clans, that produce the ethnic nations that govern our society based on eldership and ancestralship, working around ethical, moral principles that had been proven over hundreds of thousands of years. We need to go to our way.
Prof, 2020 has been a very interesting and strange year because of COVID-19, the coronavirus pandemic. Now, we know Madagascar at some point claimed to have found traditional medicine to treat the virus. Do you think African traditional medicine has a role in today's world? And if it has, do you think it should also be exposed to testing processes in the lab like these vaccines?
Well, look at Africa. Are we not doing well with COVID?
Yeah, of course we're doing well. Yeah, we're doing very well, I must say.
We're doing very well because the people are using different indigenous herbal medicine all over the country, all over the continent. And Madagascar has put together a product, and the main scientists is a young doctor from Congo, and the Madagascar government offered him safety because others wanted to hurt him because of his knowledge. And so we already know our medicine work. The first thing I did when I came from Africa in February,
Yes.
and this COVID thing hit.
Yes.
I got on the telephone. I called my Baba in Africa. I said, hey, go to the gods and the ancestors and take care of me and my family.
Oh, yes.
What do you need for the sacrifices and the Igbo?
Huh.
Because I know the indigenous medicine, because it isn't just about the medicine. It's about the spirit. It's about the energy. You sit in that chair right there, and you think you're Godfried. But Godfried is your new title. When your mother and father gave birth to you, they gave birth to themselves. And when they were given birth to by your grandparents had given birth to themselves. You are the ancestors in continuum. And so we need to understand African culture on the real side, a culture that we should rightfully call sacred science, the African sacred science. That's what we need to return to. How does the world work according to us? Not how does we try to figure out how the world work according to Europeans. Our ancestors believed that what we call God is the totality of creation, and we are nothing more than an aspect of that totality. So we start with the whole and look at the parts. The European look at the parts and he's lost trying to create a whole. And that's why he's had such a mess in his society.
Yeah. And from what you're saying, Prof, I can tell the African history is very rich. Now, how can we learn from that rich history as we work towards the vision and aspirations of Agenda 2063? We're working towards building a prosperous continent.
Yes. So we have to study history. Dr. Wade Nobles, another teacher, said history will erase the white man's mystery. Our history will erase the white man's mystery and allow us to create the African miracle that we are trying to create. And so when you study your history, you can reconstruct your societies based on the cultural experience of your ancestors, not on the narratives of your ancestors' enemy, you see. And that's what we're doing now. We're being informed by our enemy's narrative. What is the narrative of our ancestry? It's like this pandemic. They're saying, oh, the Chinese started. They said, oh, the Americans started. My ancestors tell me they started it. God started it. God sat the world down and said, where's your neutron bomb? Where's your atom bomb? Where's your drone? You can't stop me because you can't even see me. I am God. I am the universe. When I respond, I shut your world down. And what can you do? But cry, oh, I'm trying to find a vaccine. Oh, first in the beginning, they said, Africa's going to be wiped out because they're so underdeveloped. They don't have the infrastructure. Well, look who is being wiped out.
No, that's very true and scary.
Hey. So our people need to wake up and turn back to the gods of our fathers and mothers. Turn back to the spiritual system and the sacred science. It's not dead. In Zulu land, they still practice it. The Shona, we still practice it. In Yoruba, Akan, Dogon, we still practice our indigenous institution. We've just allowed colonialism of our mind to marginalize them, but they didn't go anywhere. I studied it. I get on an airplane. I come to Africa to be taught by my elders about my indigeneity. Okay. So you live there. You know exactly where they are. You know exactly who to go to when you get in trouble. When the doctor says, oh, I can't help you anymore, that stone that you reject in the middle of the night, that's the first house you run to. Says, oh, Baba, please help me, please help me, please help me. So let's bring our truth center stage. Let's teach our herbalism in the medical school. Let's bring our herbalists and healers in the hospitals. Let's give them a place to train them so we can credentialize them properly. Okay. Let's take control of our own pharmacology instead of selling our herbal gardens to the Western pharmaceutical company who's using your herbs to make the Western medicine, and they put their label in the bottle and tell you, oh, you have nothing. But yet I have a Harvard. Let me tell you a story. Once my friend took me to Harvard University. I was doing a lecture there. And they have something they call the herbarium. It's the tallest building on the Harvard campus. You know what the herbarium is? Every herb and fauna from Africa is there. They send a graduate student to study in Madagascar and Congo and to meet with the priests and the priestesses, find out what these herbs are used for, bring samples of it back to Harvard. And when they get through testing, they sell our stuff to the white pharmaceutical companies and tell us, oh, we're backwards, we know nothing. Yet what you are selling to the pharmaceutical, you send your graduate student and your doctors pretending they're coming to help us, and they steal this information and bring it back to you. Britain do the same thing. France do the same thing. Wake up, Africa. Like my little sister from Kenya says, wake up, wake up, wake up, you know.
It's time to wake up.
Yes.
Now you spoke about education and schools, and I'm just thinking about the curriculum followed in most schools on Africa. Are you happy with that curriculum, or you think it needs to be changed?
Colonial. Throw the colonial educational garbage out because it's not education. You young people need to rewrite the curriculum in every African nation so that we can learn the history. Let me learn about Bambata. Tell me how he whipped the socks off the British. Let me learn about Secheweya. Let me learn about the Battle of Islambadan. Let me learn how the Battle of Islambadan in South Carolina with Secheweya leading his troops, protecting the integrity of his younger king, brought down the entire British government of Robespierre. That's true history. Don't tell me about Robespierre, some big man. Tell me how Secheweya's war caused his government to crumble. Tell me about Muhammad Ahmed in Sudan, when the British and the Arabs invade, in the Battle of Khartoum. And in one day, with his bow and arrows and his spears, going up against their recoiling rifle, they came in with 30,000 people. He sent them back to Egypt with 3,000. Tell me that story. Tell me about Timbuktu. Tell me about Abdullah. Tell me about the defense our great kings put up to save our continent. Tell me about Menelik and his crushing of the Italian army. Tell me that story. Tell me about his strategy and his science. Tell me those stories. Tell me about Amanatu, who is this queen king in the Borneo Empire in northern Nigeria, how she took on the Turkish slave traders and beat them back and beat them down. Tell me that story. Tell me about the Mali Empire. Tell me about the Ghana Empire. Tell me about the Sangye Empire. Tell me about the Kilwa Empire. Tell me about the great Zulu Empire, the great Shona Empire, the great Zimbabwe. Let our children know these stories, and that we defended our continent, and that we have a culture, and we have a medical system, and we had an educational system. We built the only civilizations in the world. Go to Europe and show me the remnants of a civilization. The Greek copy of Kemet doesn't say much. Africa is the only place where civilization was ever built and everybody else copied it. Tell my children that. You know?
Now, Prof, I know you are based in the United States. What are you doing to help African Americans stay true to their roots and still believe in themselves despite all that is currently taking place in the country?
Well, ever since we've been in this country, we've been at war. And the war has not just been physical, it's been mainly about our identity. You know, we didn't just start calling ourselves African Americans a few years ago. Study our history in the 1700s and 1800s. All of our institutions was named either Africa this, or Sudan this, or Ethiopian this, long before the 20th century. We never gave up our culture. We held on to what we could, and we used what we could. And our movement didn't start with Dr. King. Study African American history. Our movement started over here the day we stepped off of the first boat. Our first major rebellion was the Stoner Rebellion in 1821. No, I'm sorry, 1721, when we set up and fought to set up our first Maroon community in Florida. Okay. And the rebellion started in South Carolina. We burnt down New York City in 1712, burnt it to the ground. We had over 3,000 major rebellions in this country. They don't want to talk about it, but we talk about it. You know, we've been trying to learn Swahili for years, and many of our community thought Swahili would be the best language because it was so widely spoken. So you'll find many of our people who are learning different African languages, but all over this country, you'll find people wearing traditional clothes. We started the whole thing with the natural hairdo, the look, going back to natural Africa in the 50s, wearing traditional African clothes, wearing our hair in our indigenous naps or locks. And it's not dreadlocks. The British call it dreadlocks. You know, from being in Africa, all our indigenous priestess in most of the culture in Botswana and Ghana and Nigeria, when we are studying to be priests, we grow those locks. They're called sacred locks. And we grow them because it is a way of referring back to our ancestors when they didn't have a comb yet and their hair locked naturally. And so we need to just study our culture, study our history. Our systems are not dead. They didn't destroy our culture. They've marginalized it, but it's still there. And all of us know when the white doctor can no longer help you and white medicine don't work, we know exactly where we go to the bush to look for help. Okay?
Oh,
so
yes.
We know it's there. So let's bring it from the bush to center stage and teach it to our children. Teach our history to our children so that we know who we are. And we've never given up. We never submitted to colonialism. We fought it every step of the way. We never submitted to slavery. We fought it every step of the way. The Haitian Revolution with our great Jean-Jacques Dessalines, whose birthday just passed, and we are celebrating him all over the hemisphere. You know, our great Nani and Kwojo in Jamaica, who took on the British Empire. If you go to our Baba in Barbados, we never submitted. Some of us were forced to, but there was always some of us who were at arms at war. From then to now, we fought on the ships. We fought on the shores of Africa. We fought in the bushes of Africa. They didn't just take us easy. Our people didn't say, oh, take our children and you go. No, we fought. Africa fought to keep us from going into slavery. We never stopped fighting. There was one, people say, oh, the Ashanti sold people into slavery. Oh, that's a minimal truth. It's not a big truth. The Ashanti nation didn't even come into being until slavery was almost over. And there was one Asantehene. His name was Bonsu. He brought the Ashanti army from central Ghana and came to the coast and crushed the Dutch and the Portuguese and took the slave dungeon from them and drove them into the sea. Tell our children that story. Tell them about the great Bonsu. Tell them about the great Ya Santiwa, our Queen Mother, who took on the best the British had. Tell our story. We never gave up to slavery. We never gave up to colonialism. And what you're doing now is a continuation of the fight against colonialism and slavery.
You know, talking about, slavery, it reminds me a beautiful statement I once heard. Someone said, we always say slaves were taken from Africa to America, but that's not the truth. People were taken from Africa and they were made slaves in America.
Right. And we never stopped being African, no matter what they did. Like I told you in the beginning, I grew up in an African village. My mom dressed the same way the women in West Africa dressed. When I finally got to West Africa, I goes, oh my God, this is a mirror of the village I grew up in. Even the very
Mm.
needle that they use to sew the net is the same needle my grandpa used and taught me to sew nets. The way they pull their fishing net in and take the boat in, that's the same way we did it.
Mm. Mm.
Okay.
Mm. Mm.
And so we cooked our foods the same way. Okra, our beans, we call it red rice there. You
Yes.
call it jollof rice here. Um,
Yes.
we salt our fish the same way. We smoke our fish the same way. But you don't
Ah.
know that until you visit home, until you
Yes.
one another and you talk to one another. Then you go, this, except for the trappings of our
Yeah.
colonial rulers, there's
Mm.
nothing different about us. The only
Otherwise, we would be
the
same.
only thing different about us is the things of the European we've adopted to ourselves. Throw that
Ah. Ah.
garbage away, and we're looking in a
We are the
mirror.
same.
We're looking in a mirror.
We had President Barack Obama in the White House, and now we have Kamala Harris as a running mate for former Vice President Joe
Mm.
Biden. What does it say about American politics?
That's not American politics. The only way that Obama got elected is that you had the largest outturn of African Americans in the history of America. And had we not made that number, because the white Americans, they sought to use him because they had no choice. But we elected him twice.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yes.
maybe we can do the same thing to get Kamala in there, but she needs to get her little head together a little bit too. But we'll work on that. Because the African identity is more than a label. It is a value
Yes.
system. It is a worldview. It is a way of life. It is a way we carry out intergenerational transmission of our ancestral wisdom to our children. You can't just put it on as a label and say, I'm Black or I'm African American. It's just a label. No, you have to have an understanding of history. You have to have an understanding of our culture. You have to develop a worldview that reflects African integrity based on African histology, you know. But we'll work. First, we got to defeat the enemy that's there, and then we'll work on our sister and say, "Oh, don't pay too
Absolutely.
much attention to India in terms of identity, because we founded India too, and there's hundreds of millions of black-skinned Africans who are Indians who still live there. Our great Dalit brothers and sisters. So, if you're going to claim India, which India are you claiming? The white Hindu oppressive culture, or are you going to claim the culture of your mother, which is the culture of the Dalit people of the South?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Now, Professor James Moore, what's your final message to Africans that are watching this show right now?
Study history. Study your history. Young people, fight to change the curricula. Get rid of these colonial curriculums. Put together your own African indigenous curriculum based on your history, as you know your history. Talk about our great revolutionaries, talk about the people who waged the war in South Africa. They don't tell us much about the war. It's hard to say, oh, just Nelson came out of prison and solved everything. No, talk about our great Queen Mother, Winnie Mandela. Don't let them kill her spirit. Keep Winnie alive. Nelson was in jail for 28 years. Winnie was on the front line with the community for 28 years. Don't lose that revolutionary symbol. Don't lose Stephen Biko. Please, for God's sake, keep Stephen's spirit alive. Celebrate his life. Don't forget about the great Bambata. Don't forget about the great Queen Mother who led the Shona people in Zimbabwe in that area fighting against the Brits before they captured her. Don't forget the great men and women of the Congo, like Queen Nzanga, who takes on the Portuguese for nearly 45, 50 years. Don't forget those people. They are you. You are they. When your parents gave birth to you, they gave birth to themselves. And that means that continuum go back to the first ancestor, who is God itself, the universe, the totality of everything is our divinity. And we're nothing more than an expression of an aspect of God's divine essence having the human experience. Give up the other foolish, childish theologies that have done nothing but oppress and suppress us. And because they send a few of us to school and a few to college, they tell us, oh, we're so blessed. When most of our people you keep in the darkness. No. Let the universe be the light of your world.
On that note, I'd like to thank you very much, Professor James Small, for spending time with us. We'll definitely invite you again because there's a lot that we learned, and there's a lot that we can still learn from you.
Yes. Remember this, Godfrey. Freedom, true freedom, is being shackled to your identity. True freedom is being shackled to your identity, shackled to your ancestry, who you are nothing more than an extension of, according to
yes. There's an African proverb which says, the words of the elderly are as sweet as honey, but if you do not listen, they become as sour as bile. I hope young people have listened today and they've learned from you. The Nigerians also say, if a child shoots an arrow that hits the top of the palm tree, then it must be an elderly person who carved the arrow for him. I really want to thank you very much, Professor James Moore, for what you make us, for making us who we are, and for continuing making us who we can become. A village without the elderly is like a well without water. Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you, sir. Peace and blessings.
Awesome.